Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Hello, I hope you had a weekend that recharged your batteries, that got you mentally focused or centered again. And if not, then, well, it's a brand new week. Let's try this all over again. Hi, thank you for listening to The Ron Show, whether it's on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com. Whether you're tuning in late night progressive voices via TuneIn, I appreciate them for the airtime and you for listening, or maybe you listen via podcast. That is fantastic. Thank you for doing so. Incidentally, happy Veterans Day to all who have served. It's going to be a lot of memes and I think hollow platitudes and gratitude shown on social media from folks who for the last 6 days have been being gloaty deplorable about the election of a man who has shown utter disrespect for veterans, those lost in war, and prisoners of war. But I digress. All right, let's turn the page. It's hard to sugarcoat the effects of last week's electoral results and look with a lens of optimism. But I'm actually going to try and do that at some point today. I'm also going to discuss where I think the Democratic Party needs to go and who its next leader needs to be. Incidentally, when I was doing some research on that conversation, I looked at YouGov polling to determine who the most popular Democrats are currently for Americans. And the number one most popular Democrat, according to YouGov, he's not going to run for office. He's not going to have an active role in the party. His name is Jimmy Carter. Enjoys 61% popularity and 96% fame. Number two on that list, also unable to run for president because he won it twice already, would be Barack Hussein Obama. Number three on the list, interestingly enough, is Kamala Harris. Okay, I mean, I'm open to another run at Kamala Harris. I'm concerned that the rise of the manosphere and the, I believe, radicalization of young white men in this country make that prohibitive without a wholesale change in messaging from Kamala Harris if there is going to be a future where a Kamala Harris runs for president again. Anyway, number four on the list, Bernie Sanders. Number five on the list, and six as well, I'm a little stunned by this, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton. Number seven on the list, see, this is where you start to see the kinks in the armor. Elizabeth Warren. Number eight, Joe Biden. These are the most popular Democrats, by the way. Number nine, Nancy Pelosi, AOC at 10. I haven't even mentioned who I think can and probably should be the next face of the Democratic Party. But I will reveal that a little bit later in the show. No, I kind of figured maybe it's best we start with optimism. And I know it's hard to find that optimism, but we have to look for it where we can find it, right? There are signs that Democrats are actually winning on issues that matter to the voter. 7 of 10 states that had abortion measures on the ballot had measures pass. 2 of them were wholesale changes, going from near total or total bans to abortion is legal in that state. Those 2 states, Arizona and Missouri. Neither of those measures helped Kamala Harris carry those states, and I think a lot of Democrats were sort of banking on that, which again shows me that it's not as cut and dried. Republicans are all pro-life. All Democrats are pro-choice. There's obviously some middle ground, but also I surmised this last week. I believe in my heart of hearts, and I bit my tongue on this, and I'm mad that I didn't. Not that like my voice was going to change the trajectory of the presidential race or somehow wind up in the war room at Harris HQ, and they were going to, hey, this Ron guy says this. Maybe we should. I think the campaign was so focused on abortion that they ignored other key issues that obviously were on the minds of the American electorate. So that is some good news. Add two more states to the list of states where abortion is now legal. And they're not insignificant states. One of them, a swing state. Again, it didn't help the presidential nominee. The other being Missouri, one of those perceived flyover states, a state that used to be a swing state. I don't know what the hell happened to that state. Josh Hawley won re-election, by the way. But a state that is literally the center of the country. Like, geographically speaking, it is the center of the country. And maybe you think this is small consolation, but prior to Missouri's decision Tuesday, there were whole states that had no nearby drive access to reproductive choice. And now neighboring Arkansas can look to Missouri. Now neighboring Nebraska, Iowa can look to Missouri. Northern Louisiana, Northeast Texas, Western Tennessee, Northern Mississippi can all look to Missouri. Kansas, of course, had a ballot measure in 2022, which is great, but the problem with Kansas is most of the access is on the eastern portion of the state, which was already nearest to Missouri, but still, the western portion of Kansas has Colorado to look at. Northwest Texas can point to New Mexico until the Texas Rangers stop them at the border. I mean, there's all kinds of draconian talk there. Arizona, again, another state where abortion was on the ballot. The Democratic nominee didn't win that state, but reproductive choice did. That alone, and some other tea leaves we see in some down-ballot races where Democrats fared better than the top of the ticket, are signs that there is a blueprint in place. There is a plan in place. Maybe not a plan, but a blueprint in place, I should say, for Democrats to succeed in subsequent election cycles. And the fight for reproductive choice is not over. Even in states where referendums aren't allowed, Georgia being one of them, Texas being another, Florida, where a measure was on the ballot, but a high 60% threshold, really hard to overcome. Although 57%, pretty damn close. Again, it just goes to show that on individual issues, Democrats can be on the right side of the ideological spectrum and still lose out in other areas. It's really hard, by the way, for Democrats to win at the national level when the movement is akin to a small herd of cats. Anybody who has cats knows it's hard to herd cats. We all have our various factions and ideologies and causes that may not align with all the other ideological leanings and causes, et cetera, and so on, that make it really hard for Democrats to herd all the cats in the same direction. But this is where I would also tell Democrats, I see so much finger pointing, so much infighting in the last 6 days. It's understandable. Whose fault is this? What are we going to do? And I kind of think we have to come to the conclusion that it's no one person's fault. There's a lot of reason to be upset about the way things went Tuesday. But I think arguing about ideological leanings for the party, who's in charge, I just, or just deciding to abandon the party or divert your attention to other things. The Working Families Party, cool party, gets no traction. What are you going to do? The reactions that I'm seeing and hearing, absorbing in Tuesday night's aftermath, kind of coalescing around these thoughts. The party sucks, or they both suck. I didn't vote for either. intellectually lazy. They've gone too far to the left. Absolute bullshit. Or some form of policy beef that was that individual's red line. And then there was, we have to lie to voters like the other side does. One of my really good friends, Sonia, lives in Augusta. She has worked for various political campaigns up and down the ladder. That's her reaction. And I'm going to speak directly to that. I'm going to speak directly to all of these points. I get the anger. I get that somebody wants to blame somebody or some people, and it's just what Democrats do. When Hillary lost in 2016, it's the Bernie Bros. The Bernie Bros actually showed up in greater numbers than Hillary's disillusion base did in 2008 for Barack Obama. So look in a mirror. I'm not going to relitigate that. But that's what we do. We lose and we look inside and go, well, who caused that? So of these 4 points, the party sucks or they both suck, so I didn't vote for either. That's the first one I want to touch on. I'm not shy about calling out intellectual laziness, and if my doing so offends you, okay, you may go. Or you could do some self-reflection. It's okay to be unaware and to grow from that, myself included, okay? I say that because sometimes you need to acknowledge you're being unaware of baked-in disadvantages that one party always has to overcome. The other side doesn't, and won't address so long as that's the case. Democrats winning legislative majorities is akin to catching a fly with a chopstick, thanks to gerrymandering and how state lines divvy us up into 50 wildly disparately sized but equally allotted representative factions. That makes even winning the presidency more difficult. Hence, popular vote wins in 2000 and 2016 that didn't at the office. If you're disillusioned with the party that can't consistently overcome that to the point you quit trying, you're part of the problem. Sorry, I'm not sorry. Your disillusionment is a secondary result the opposition wants. That's right, you are helping them. So instead, you got to regroup. The second point, the party's gone too far to the left. This is what I chuckle over because I am to the left of the mainstream in the party. And I'm still waiting for that to happen. I see no evidence of it. Very little evidence of it. Did we push for universal health care? I heard nobody talk about universal health care. In fact, the nominee used to talk about universal health care when she was running for president in 2000. She didn't talk about it this cycle. The Democratic Party hasn't embraced its left flank in my lifetime, the way it seeks to appease the center and center right anyway. If you think they've gone too far to the left, you're listening to too much conservative punditry or hearing this quip from someone else who is. Don't get mad at trans people. Their very existence being used in lines of attack was much ado about nothing because there was no push from the party to enforce or inflict trans ideology. Not that there is such a thing. Just the very existence of trans people or, pushing for growth in gender-affirming care or anything like that. None of that was happening from the party. That was a bogeyman that the right concocted and used effectively. But the left, the party, they didn't push for that. And listen, if it affected your mindset in the voting booth, you were manipulated. Just own it. Your bigotry was used to sway you. Acknowledgement is the first step. Shedding the bigotry the next. Or, you know what, you can interchange those. That's fine. As long as I think you do both. Shed the bigotry. Acknowledge you were manipulated. There is no spike in youth trans surgical procedures. No run on women's sports with towering, muscly trans women, former men, the way you saw in campaign ads, dominating your daughters. And no, Kamala Harris wasn't for illegal immigrants in prisons getting anything other than what our very laws have always protected folks in prisons getting: medically necessary care. The attack ads prominently aimed at men during sporting events, I know this because I watch sporting events, was a giant nothing burger. And if it moved you to vote against Kamala Harris, sorry, not sorry, you were conned. Okay, but this isn't, just about trans issues. The Democratic Party nominee didn't stump with the Squad or Bernie Sanders or Nina Turner or anybody radically to the progressive left. She did barnstorm with Liz Cheney, Republican, Adam Kinzinger, Republican, Jeff Duncan, Republican. They and other prominent Republicans spoke at the DNC, couldn't get a Palestinian-American representative on the dais at the DNC. We know because the name bandied about often for that role, Representative Ruah Roman from Gwinnett County, Georgia, was that person. She has been on the show. We discussed that after the DNC. You'd be hard-pressed to find progressive positions in her or the party's 2024 platform either. Universal health care? Didn't see it. Tuition-free public college? Who spoke of it? Anybody? Defunding Israel? Can't find them. When placed on ballots, though, progressive policies won. See, if anything, the parties tried too hard, and for too long, in my opinion, to woo everyone but progressive voters, while also blaming progressive voters for not being faithful in return. Look what you made me do. How many times has the victim of domestic violence heard that? Look what you made me do. Look what you did. Progressives have been hearing that. We heard that after Hillary lost in 2016. We'll hear it again. I could go down the rabbit hole and disorganize when we need to actually regroup us, though. So instead, I'm going to push back when someone says the party's too radical now for me, because I'll just simply ask, okay, what issue? Name it. I'll always ask. And when I do, it's usually met with either silence or some nonsense that shows me that, back to the overarching point, you were manipulated. It's okay. We just have to learn and grow from that. I told you I had 2 more points to respond to. Going to take a quick break. Come back. We'll get to those when the Ron Show returns. And I'm telling you, we're going to fight with some optimism here. On America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn. Follow the Ron Show on your preferred social media platform at Ron Show ATL, Twitter, X, Instagram, Threads, Facebook. I need to get on Blue Sky. I know a lot of people are abandoning the Twitter X platform. Have been for quite a while. I get it. I'm just not ready to give up the ghost just yet. I don't know. It may be akin to having a Truth Social profile at this point. It is what it is. We're talking about the 4 things that I've heard from a lot of folks who are sort of reacting to the top of the ticket, losing the presidential election, Donald Trump coming back into office. Democrats actually down ballot in a lot of swing states, bucked the trend. And we'll talk a little bit about that and how I think what their campaign successes can be clue-wise for the rest of the party. But I want to talk about some of the issues that Democrats want to infight and blame. A lot of it, the third point I was going to get to, red line crossing of issues that were important, notably the Gaza-Israel situation. It's not the only one. I've had a guest on before who talked about reparations, the party's lack of response to reparations, which I just believe is political poison. But the party didn't talk about it. They also didn't lose African-American support. At least it was minimal. No, the third point, inside the tent here, I too wish Biden-Harris had yanked funding from Israel, but that was never going to end the war on Gaza, and it definitely was going to cost them votes greater in numbers than those it would have solidified with the largely symbolic act. And I think those who sought to see a stronger stance from Joe Biden on Israel need to recognize that fact, okay? The smarter play all along would have been to help win the White House and challenge it at every turn after the fact. And now you'll get told to pound sand as the aggressor you loathe is firmly protected by an incoming administration, preferable to seeing Gaza be blown to glass and eventually reformed as Israel beachfront property with a Trump hotel on it, probably. On this and a small list of issues, the ideological purity types who chose to stay home or vote third party or skip that section on the ballot only made matters worse for their cause. It's just something I've never understood. When the building you're in is ablaze, but the fireman that came to rescue you is someone you recognize who cut you off in traffic earlier, so you hold a grudge and rebuff the assistance, you're just going to get engulfed in the blaze. In this case, you just engulfed us all. Now, to the final point, the one that my friend Sonia championed in the infancy of her feelings after the loss. We do not have to lie to voters to win elections. We have to do the exact opposite and be more truthful, honestly, period. How many of you even knew more criminal immigrants came into the U.S. under Donald Trump than Joe Biden? Well, if you listen to this show, you already knew that, but the numbers aren't even close. 92,920 to 56,280. That statistic alone eviscerates a chief line of attack this cycle. But outside of yours truly and my show, I doubt you'd find evidence of it being mentioned this election cycle. I mean, listen, I get it. The data only came out October 30th, but that's a full week prior to Election Day. Where was it? That goes back to the discussion we were having with King Williams last week, that the left wing needs its version of the right wing media ecosystem. We don't need cable TV and talk radio. We need our own version of that for the 21st century. More optimism when we return on The Ron Show on American One Radio and Progressive Voices via TuneIn. Promise.
Broadcasting 5 days a week to make common sense common again. This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
I play that intro all the time. There's common belief, common sense, and then there's common knowledge. And I may have just talked myself out of ever using that bump again, because common belief isn't always fact. Sometimes it can be utter bullshit. Common sense may rely on common belief, which may make it utter bullshit. And then there's common knowledge, something that Democrats, progressives, liberals have to, I think, lean in more with. My friend Sonia, I told you her immediate reaction last week was, well, we're just going to have to lie like the other side does. I get what she was thinking emotionally, and she's not wrong in that we do need that left-wing version of the right-wing ecosystem. Talk radio, the three, there's OAN, Newsmax, Fox News. There are the right side broad RSBN. Like, I don't even know if that's going to exist anymore, because I think it was mostly just a Trump campaign, channel. But you have at least 3, maybe 4 cable news outlets. The podcast sphere has been taken over by right wing mouths, voices. I say that. And yet, like, Joe Rogan is the most popular podcaster. And yet, when you listen to how he believes on key issues, he's actually a liberal. How did we lose Joe Rogan? We'll dive into that in a little bit. I want to finish, though, with common knowledge and how Democrats need to be better at producing common knowledge, and early and often, on loop, on repeat, the way the right-wing ecosystem does. I mentioned to you that there is a fact, the Cato Institute just released this study a couple of weeks ago that bore out that more criminal immigrants came into the U.S. under Donald Trump than under Joe Biden. That came out a full 6 days before Election Day, and Kamala HQ didn't share that. I did. That's a fact that never left the starting gates. When I clarify that all U.S. prisoners are protected by law to receive necessary health care, even trans prisoners. Did you know that? That would have eviscerated the campaign ad that ran in several sporting events targeting men with their anti-trans sentiments. When you're made aware that inflation was a global issue, and we had far less of it to deal with than the rest of the planet did, and that on average, American wages eventually caught up with, and in some cases surpassed those costs. Anybody know that? And I get it. It's sort of hard to tell people, no, you're actually doing better than you feel. It's, again, something that the 2016 Democratic message was really bad about. And I think the Harris-Walz campaign was trying to deal with, talking about price gouging, but price gouging wasn't enough. But when you hear the line of attack, Joe Biden caused it. There was never much pushback about that. Did you ever wonder how that's even possible? Or just gullibly accept the line of attack? The thinking being that, Joe was doling out all that stimulus and that was the cause. Except his predecessor, the guy who just got reelected to the office, doled out twice as much of that stimulus. So make it make sense. On that and a lot of issues that Kamala Harris had saddled on her as being part of the Biden-Harris administration, causation came before them, and the fixes are either in motion or enacted, but they didn't really run, I think, discussing issues that actually resonated with the American people, obviously, because they didn't win. The point is, we don't need to lie to win. Democrats, progressives, liberals. We need to do better at telling the truth. We need a left-wing version of the right-wing media ecosystem that's plastered our discourse with the disinformation. Some I managed to eviscerate just on today's show and have tried to do so for the last 2 years. That's seeing voters vote against their own economic interests. Lesser people are easily swayed. If you've heard this, you've come this far on this show, you're not lesser people. But if you were swayed not to vote third party, or even worse, to vote for Donald Trump, that's on you letting yourself, your loved ones, your neighbors, and nation down. Not the party, not the candidate, not progressives. You. It's on you. I get it. You have issues with the Democratic Party or its candidate or candidates. In a two-party system, that's always going to be the case. But you'll never have meaningful input for the party while outside it. If you're 65% or better aligned ideologically, step into the tent and collaborate on taking back our country so we can have those policy discussions we don't align on. Because chances are, the reason we'd not be in agreement comes down to either misunderstanding or an inability to address that issue because the other side has poisoned the American mindset on it that it's politically inexpedient to address it. I'm thinking about reparations. I'm thinking about Gaza, Israel. A good football team always has players who'd like more attention on what they do. A really good running back would love it if the team ran the ball more. A wide receiver really wants to see the ball thrown more, and in his direction, of course. Hell, it's in a field goal kicker's best interest that the team actually isn't as good as it should be for his statistics to benefit. A winning team has all of those players aware that everything they want and may benefit from is secondary to winning the game. You play to win the game. Win enough games, you hoist trophies. What I'm saying is that the team needs you. And that the other team uses the term divide and conquer. It's long been a rallying cry for the right and a tactic they've used to great effect. So, I'm putting this on you. Stop letting them. Stick with your team and get your ass back in the game. Let me turn the page a little bit. How did some Democrats win down the ballot when the top of the ticket didn't? David Leonard at the New York Times writes in the letter today, there are some key issues where there was some difference in messaging. Number one, immigration. Many Democrats, he writes, have been in denial about immigration. Some initially argued that immigration didn't soar under President Joe Biden. Others claim Biden's policies weren't the cause. Still, others dismissed concerns about strained social services and crowded schools as Republican misinformation. Many Republicans, to be clear, he writes, did tell lies about immigration, but Biden did spark a huge immigration wave, David writes. He encouraged more people to come to the U.S. and loosen entry rules. I think loosening the entry rules is how you would say he encouraged. I don't know that he necessarily verbally encouraged people. Come on, Katie bar the door. Come on in. Sure enough, immigration surged to its highest levels in many decades, Leonard writes. If anyone doubted Biden's role, more proof came this year when he tightened policy and immigration plummeted. The Democrats who won tough races, he writes, recognized that their party had lost credibility on this issue. Mary Kaptur, she won a, 22nd term in Congress despite running in a district that Donald Trump won. In one of Kaptur's ads, she called out the far left for ignoring millions illegally crossing the border. In a Ruben Gallego ad, he said, Arizonans know, on the border, there is no plan. Harris' campaign emphasized border security too, but she was Biden's vice president, David Leonard writes, and had spent the 2020 campaign calling for many of the changes he implemented. She never explained why she changed her mind. Biden hasn't explained his reversal either. Again, though, here's where I'm going to say this is about messaging more than policy, because Joe Biden went into office knowing that he needed legislation. He needed more boots on the ground. You can't enforce border policy with so few boots on the ground, or without judges and attorneys in place to handle the swell. What he sought to do was to show Republicans and the American people that this is an issue that just can't be brutally enforced, and it's just going to go away. And that's going to happen again. This is all cyclical. Donald Trump will come in. Maybe he'll enforce some deportation policies and, family separations again. I mean, he just affirmed that he's going to bring in a border czar who is not shy about saying, well, we may have to bring family separations back in. The cruelty is the point, right? And then when that pendulum swings again, the problem's not going to go away. The reason people come here isn't going to go away. And a lot of those reasons are us. Climate change, the way our lifestyle inflicts a burden on folks in other parts of the Western Hemisphere and the world. They have to escape those dramatic effects by going somewhere, whether it's environmentally, whether it's politically, socioeconomically. A lot of those reasons are us. They're going to go somewhere. Those problems aren't going to just go away. Putting a Band-Aid on it isn't going to fix those problems. So inevitably, it's like having a huge gash on your leg. You can throw a Band-Aid on it. It'll stop the bleeding for a little while until the blood seeps through. Doesn't fix the wound. Again, this is just messaging. Democrats aren't really good at explaining that there is a larger problem that needs to be addressed. And the Biden-Harris team was actually trying to address it. Root causation of migration, right? The three countries that Kamala Harris was tasked with trying to deal with those root causes actually saw some success. Northern Triangle, El Salvador, Honduras, Costa Rica, I believe. Or was it Guatemala? I think it was Guatemala, sorry. We actually saw net migration slow, even before Joe Biden put in some stricter policies at the border. That's how you do it. You deal with the root causation that causes people to leave their home country. Trust me, they'd rather stay there. It's human nature. We're all lazy. We're kind of lazy, right? We don't want to walk hundreds, thousands of miles with our kids in tow, through dangerous parts of Mexico with dangerous people guiding us. They'd rather stay where they are. Let's give them reason to want to do that. Root causation. That's what Democrats are trying to do. Republicans, on the other hand, they ran against NAFTA. And I get it. NAFTA spread the jobs around to countries other than the United States. Well, you want people to stay there and work and make a good living and live comfortably without coming here to somehow ruffle your feathers? You gotta have jobs. What really moved the needle this election cycle, however, was the economy. Back to the letter from the New York Times, David Leonard writing. Democrats who won tough races ran to the left. On economic issues. Progressives. They sounded like blue-collar populists, fed up with high prices, slow wage growth, corporate greed, and unfair Chinese competition. Kamala Harris, by contrast, sounded like an establishment centrist, even citing a Goldman Sachs report during her debate with Donald Trump. Elisa Slotkin, the senator-elect in Michigan, spoke of how her mother had been, quote, gouged by insurance companies. In one of Jared Golden's ads, he cracked open a lobster with his hands while promising to lower health care costs. In two difficult upstate New York races, Josh Riley called for tariffs and blasted corporate greed, while Pat Ryan, by the way, tariffs are not going to help. Sorry. Pat Ryan focused on high housing costs. In Ohio, we spoke of Miss Captor, she said the following: they're ruining our country. The billionaires and corporations who send our jobs overseas. Their religion is greed, and their Bible is corporate profits. Even Senator Sherrod Brown, who ran 7 points ahead of Harris, even though he lost a close race, he offered a similar message in Ohio. This populism, David Leonard writes, was not purely progressive, though. It also tried to address voters' concerns about the Democratic Party's fondness for big government. Jared Golden, for example, criticized Biden's aggressive spending agenda. Baldwin bragged about protecting a small Wisconsin cheesemaker against federal regulation. The common strand was opposition to concentrated power, be it from big business, foreign government, or Washington. You know, that's a pretty important little... Put a pin in that. Because I ask this all the time. Why are people afraid of big government but not afraid of big business? Big business is more in our lives than big government. If there are voters who are fearful of big government, we need to make them fearful of big business. That's essentially our messaging with reproductive choice, right? We don't want government in our exam rooms. Okay, so let's talk about getting business out of our privacy data, out of our Food and Drug Administration, out of our environmental policy. I guarantee you Democrats are going to use that in the 2026 midterms because Donald Trump can't help himself. He's got to placate his deep-pocketed friends by putting them in positions to undo a lot of what has been accomplished to try and get this country moving in the correct direction when it comes to the environment and climate change. He can't help himself. But I also want to tell you that is where I have reason for optimism as well. Donald Trump is easily manipulated. Democrats should maybe take some cues from Donald's deep-pocketed friends and donors, Republicans, and maybe even Vladimir Putin. No, definitely Vladimir Putin. And start working to manipulate him as well. He's easily manipulated, so we might as well take advantage of it. And that's where the optimism comes in. I will cover that in just a few seconds. Here, The Ron Show on American One Radio and Progressive Voices via TuneIn. You can head to ronshowatl.com for show notes. That way, if you hear me reading something from an article or something like that, citations there for you, baby. I'll have a David Leonard's letter from the New York Times that I've been reading from a good bit at ronshowatl.com in today's show notes. Here are what I believe are some economic truths. Donald Trump can do as he promised to do and deport tens of millions, if there are tens of millions, illegal immigrants. Or he can continue to enjoy an economy that he inherits with low unemployment and now low inflation. He cannot do both. No, I believe that 1,000%. He cannot spend $80 billion a year deporting 1 million or more illegal immigrants without it affecting inflation. He also cannot turn a blind eye to corporate greed without it affecting inflation. So he's going to inherit low inflation and a low unemployment rate. And I tend to think that his tendencies are stronger on seeing good economic data versus immigration and border policy. What I mean by that is I could conceive that he's going to try and do the ugly, nasty border stuff again. The deportation part, first of all, I just don't think it's feasible. I think what he's going to try to do, he's going to try and strong-arm local law enforcement. He said as much, local law enforcement and state National Guards to participate as much as is possible on rounding up or sending off the obvious. I don't think he's going to go storming into Mexican restaurant kitchens and ask for papers like, Nazi stormtroopers. But I do think he's going to try and gin up some numbers to signal to the xenophobic base of his party. And they're not all xenophobic. There were Hispanic males who swung like 54 to 44% for Donald Trump. There are people who, they're already in the treehouse. They want to pull the rope ladder up. They got a job. They want to protect it. I've said this for many years, long before I even launched this show. Republicans aren't serious about solving immigration issues because, number one, as I've mentioned before, the issues folks are coming here have a lot to do with our lifestyle. It forces us to look in the mirror, and we ain't good at that in this country. We don't like accepting blame or assessing that we are a cause of a problem. Republicans also don't want to get tough on those who hire illegally because they tend to be deep-pocketed people, and deep-pocketed people tend to vote Republican, and, well, okay, can't do that. You don't want, what did I say last week? You don't want cats on your front porch. Don't put kibble out. Problem solved. But I tend to think Donald Trump's tendencies on immigration are going to be subdued by those economic realities. He can't go full force with this without crashing the economy. And Elon Musk basically said, that's what we got to do. It's going to be some short-term pain. I don't think Donald Trump has it in him to do that. And this is where the manipulation comes in. This is where Democrats who are still in office and voices who control the narrative have to chime in. When you see unemployment creep up or you see the inflation rate creep up, he's going to have to react. And that'll temper, I think, a lot of his innermost worst tendencies. He doesn't have a filibuster-proof Senate. He may not even have enough of a majority in the House to push through legislation. And executive orders only last as long as he's in office. And we only have one Trump term to grit through. So he's going to have to seek some compromise. Maybe a pathway to citizenship for DACA recipients. Maybe a pathway to citizenship for immigrants who are here who have no criminal record. I have like 3 minutes left. I have so much stuff that I wanted to talk about today, and a lot of it's going to have to bleed over to tomorrow. I talked about who I think the face of the Democratic Party needs to be, and I've waffled on this, but I think I've come firmly in the camp of Pete Buttigieg. And maybe it's the gay guy in me. I don't think it is. I'd like to think that I can separate that mentally. I've had friends, Pete should have been the VP nominee. There's no way. There's no way that a mixed ethnic female atop the ticket and a gay male as her running mate was going to win. And I think the broification of the manosphere, the white male youth voter surge, but here's what I would say. Whereas Kamala Harris in her campaign purposely chose not to go on Joe Rogan, I don't think Pete Buttigieg would bat an eye. I think he'd go on immediately. And that's why I think Pete Buttigieg is probably the guy that we need to see more of the next 2 and 4 years. If that makes him the nominee, okay, so be it. But I think he needs to be a face of the Democratic Party, if not the voice of the Democratic Party in the near and long term. He goes on Fox News, ain't afraid to, all the time. He'd go on Joe Rogan, ain't afraid to. He'd do it in a minute. Because he comes in armed with information, and instead of shirking an audience that needs to hear that information, Mayor Pete, DOT Pete, would go in full head of steam with information, exactly as I mentioned before. Don't go in with lies. Come to voters with facts. He knows how to distill them in ways that are easy to explain, easy to understand, and folks come away, even right-wingers, thinking, I hadn't thought of that before. Yeah. No, I think that's who we need to look to when it comes to being our messenger for the next 2 to 4 years. I don't know if that makes him the nominee, the lead horse out of the stable, but I think it makes him the face, the messenger of the Democratic Party and liberal and progressive causes going forward. I just do. Just about out of time. I thought I was going to get to talk more about the radicalization of young white voters, some of them even liberal on issues. Did you know Joe Rogan was a liberal on most issues? Yeah. And why we lost Joe Rogan and men like him to Donald Trump? And maybe Pete Buttigieg is part of the answer, but we'll talk about how we got to where Joe Rogan, who is not a wise man, became a kingmaker in politics, for God's sakes. Later on the Ron Show. Show notes at ronshowatl.com. Back tomorrow, 9 to 10 a.m., 5 to 6 p.m. on America One Radio, 11 to midnight on Progressive Voices or wherever you podcast. Have a good day.